So good morning, everyone. Can we start? Yeah. So hi, I'm Luisa Massarani. I am from Brazil, and I have the great pleasure of navigating with you as chair of this plenary today. Thank you so much for being with us after the dancing thing yesterday. And so this is a plenary about finding common ground from the science of science communication. We will have my very good friend from since long time ago, Dominique Brossard. She's a pop star in science communication and in research in science communication. And she has been doing very robust research in science communication. And so the idea here is that Dominique will talk about 20 minutes, and then we have a conversation with three other very great people. We have Hepeng from Soochow University in China, who was previously was a science journalist. Now he's a research in science journalism. And then we have Yael Barrow Ben David from Israel. And then we have Alice Fleerackers. Yeah, Rackers. From Canada. So please, Dominique, can we start with you?
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I have my slides that were upstairs. Here they are. Thank you so much, everyone. So thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and seeing old friends, new friends, face to face, finally, right? And delighted to be in this session, trying to bring some ideas about, the challenge and potentially opportunities that we have when we try to find a common ground for the science of science communication. Just for those of you who do not know, I live in the United States, in the state of Wisconsin, which literally for like 3/4 of the year looks frozen. And the lake, that's the lake just in front of the Capitol that just actually unfroze. I think Alice is looking at me, this is nothing, right? And in the Department of Life Science Communication, we actually work more specific on the science of science communication, a term I'm not sure if all of you here had heard about, but is an attempt to put together theoretical and empirical finding that can help inform the communication of science effectively, and something that was, put together in different textbooks over the last few years, and special handbook by the National Science Communication in the United States, but obviously abroad as well. So the reason why I'm bringing this, because there was a very solid, theoretical undertaken in the context of risk communication, mainly coming from psychology and risk and so on for a number of years. And I would say to some extent, the science of science communication, the way we are doing it now, obviously with pioneers such as Bruce here and everybody from PCST, was not really, I would say, developed worldwide quite a bit. But we've seen a lot of development. Obviously, we have the specific journals. You all know Science Communication, Public Understanding of Science. But closer to home, obviously, our own JCOM, the Journal of Science Communication. And here, a pitch for this great journal, open access, that is really trying to find common grounds between the science of science communication and practice. The idea really to bring the world of science communication together from an empirical perspective, but also practical perspective. But, challenge, you see a lot of research also published in a traditional, let's say, basic science journal or like other type of scientific discipline. I put a few here, political science, science, technology, human values, and so on. But also things like the proceeding of the National Academy of Science in the United States, nature of human behavior, science, and so on. Is this good or is it bad? Where it's good and bad, honestly. And I think this is a problem when we try to find common grounds, because one of the challenges is all disciplines are trying to do science communication. It's great because before nobody really understood that it was very necessary to do so, but certainly it's a challenge for all of us that have done a career here when there is that feeling, I would say sometimes, that we are reinventing the wheel. Other people are reinventing the wheel of things that we know. So I think an example that's really clear for us in the United States is the context of climate change, when it's clear that, you know, you cannot just talk about those that do not believe on climate change on one end and those that are eager to do something on the other. Much complicated context. And, you know, when you look at the trends, really, you know, the dismissive, those that really do not think that we should do something about climate change, are, you know, now, actually in 2022, less than, is like close to 8%. Why am I bringing this? Because at least in the United States, we see attempts again and again to still correct misinformation and so on. And you know, like really, the idea that even practitioners that haven't been trained in science communication, embracing that idea that we should correct people's beliefs. And obviously, we all know in this room, this is not working. So correcting misinformation is missing the point, and I think that's where we can find common grounds between practice and research. But really trying to find very specifically the context in which we work. We have projects with local journalists in Wisconsin, for example, very specifically for very specific communities, trying to understand narratives that could be used in different contexts to communicate about climate change, because obviously all of us in this room, we know that each socio-political cultural context, you know, breeds a different information climate and different individual ways to deal with information. So finding common grounds when we integrate those elements to solve a specific question in a specific context, I think is going to be key for us moving forward. So opportunity number one here, only interdisciplinary approach will accurately address those big questions, such as climate change. And when I say interdisciplinary, I mean us reaching across the aisle to talk to the biologists, to talk to the climate scientists, to talk of other science, but also us reaching around the aisle, what we do here in this panel, where we have practitioners, researchers, people interested in solving a question, independently of what they are. Do we should even talk about the divide research and practice? I think it's like when we talk about the divide between applied and basic science. Is this worthwhile, or are we together trying to solve a question? So I think that's something I'm asking my panel members here, and I'm curious to see their reaction. So that means a challenge for all of you here, and me actually, we need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to talk to each other, but that means we need to really listen to each other. I mean, you know, I work in a lot of interdisciplinary projects, and you know, I've been guilty of thinking my science is better than science, and we all talking to each other. Practitioners thinking they know what they do very well. Obviously they do, but I mean, we can learn all from each other. And I think we still need to learn to do so. And finding common grounds really will be about reaching out to talk and listen. And I think PCST is a great example where we can do these kind of things. You know, just to picture a few examples of this, the National Academy of Science has tried to do that, but still does it only at the federal level. I was discussing with some German colleagues here that in Germany is a little bit the same, but AAAS, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, had tried to put together, you know, a report where they look at communities, what they're doing together with scientists, practitioners, on the ground to respond to climate change, to be examples of what works, to show that there is hope and we can work together to solve those big questions. Closer to home here, a pitch from my colleague Michaela, I don't know if she's here, some of the work she's been doing on the ground at Wisconsin, putting workshops together that are bringing people from these different perspectives together to solve the big problem. So I think that moving forward, honestly, we need also to encourage programs, and I know like Luisa has one. I mean, there's a different, the Alda, I don't know if the people are here. Yes, they have that, and so on. You know, where we build those bridges. For example, here, a PhD minor in science communication encourage other disciplines to learn about our work. finding common grounds across the aisle for other disciplines, or professional courses to encourage practitioners also to learn about the science of science communication, and those classes bring together people from very different perspectives. Challenge number 2, science moves fast, it's uncertain by nature, and I think COVID really showed it to us. Full of uncertainty, we still, that big problem that we had about communicating facts and saying statements like, let's follow the science. Let's follow what science? Science kept on constantly moving and so on, and this is a Nature actually publication that showed that there was a number of uncertainty that we needed to deal with. So the opportunity here, though, is that together, if we work together, we can move fast and be relevant. And I think when I mean that is like, if you want to do good science communication, you need to do some research to find out what people think, what people believe, and so on. And I think we have tended to do that at UW with a bunch of lots of discipline and put it together. Thank you, Marina, for publishing our paper here. When theory met practice for COVID-19, and when theory met practice and the best practice met reality, which means that, we try to do research and implement practice, and the world was evolving so fast that we would have to do that, every month, but nobody would give us money to do so. Challenge, find money. Anybody in the room wants to give us money? That is a big problem. Finding common ground really goes back to actually being able to fund those initiatives to work together. Challenge number 3, I would argue that, when we talk about science communication, this is a term that exists. But science, what is science? Science is not monolithic. I mean, even the scientific method is something that illusionary by best, right? Like every science discipline has a different way to approach. And monolithic conclusion miss the point. And I think that's where practitioners that, really have a keen understanding of the intricacy of different research practice can be very useful to build that common ground when we talk about science communication. And the reason why I say that those monolithic conclusions miss the point is because in the United States, at least, we have had I was telling you, the whole follow the science, people don't trust science, and so on. When people still trust science, they may not trust some science in some context, but overall they do trust science. And I think we're doing a disservice to all the science enterprise when they do that, what we call the trust fallacy. It feels like we move from knowledge deficit model to engagement, model to trust model. Now we're talking about trust deficit. What's the next deficit we're going to talk about? So again, together, finding common ground to find a way not to be simplistic, I think is important. So I will, wrap very soon to give time to my colleagues, but I think specificity is really something we need to talk about. Really try not to do those generalizations. And academic practitioner partnership in their specificity can really help doing that. There's been call for that. Andrew Refkin is a climate science climate journalist. He's been calling, to how media kind of must go beyond covering disasters and also do prevention, meet the researchers that do prevention and so on. Try to build those networks, building together, to address questions. Obviously, I cannot talk about challenge without talking about the new algorithm media ecology, and this is another issue that we know very well. People find their news online, and then, everybody comments, shares, and so on. Research still nascent in the science communication realm. There is some things that are really good, and I know that in Israel they've been doing excellent work in the realm, and other colleagues in the room. But there is an opportunity to do a common ground with practitioners, because if we correctly identify those information contexts, and Luisa was telling me about the vaccine example, for example, in Brazil, we can identify influencers that will influence audiences. Maybe we should be on Instagram talking to influencers that the young population are following. Who are the people that we need to talk to? When we talk about practitioners, who are they? And how can we actually find common ground to really,
build a better, resilient society. And the last challenge I wanted to talk about is the community-level participatory research. You must all have heard we need to work together with the community to identify problems, to communicate what we can. But is this a buzzword? This is really hard. I don't know if you try to do this kind of work, but it is really hard. There's a lot of public engagement, and the issue is that very often the one we see is still work with the public to understand their views, opinion, and concern, but it's never really to collaborate with stakeholders to develop solutions. And this is really what we mean by, participation. We mean that if communities are not okay with what we do, we need to be able to accept that and, and make sure that we work together. There are calls for researchers engaging meaningfully with decision makers and so on, but this is really something that hasn't happened a lot. There were some sessions that actually gave examples of this the last couple of days, so I think we are going in the new direction that's very promising. So engaging the stakeholders early to develop relevant, but most importantly, equitable science communication knowledge that can help us move forward in a positive way. So I'm going to stop here and just tell you that science communication and research and practice can and should help build resilience, equitable society. And it's only by finding the common ground, getting out of our comfort zone, that we can do that, reaching out across the island. Interdisciplinary is a must. Get involved in the participatory research, even if it makes us uncomfortable. And also, be modern and embrace our young colleagues that, after all, they're our future and they're there to help us move in the algorithmic world in a positive way. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the reactions.
Thank you so much, Dominique. So now is the time for introducing the rest of the panel. If you have questions, comments, please write down. We hopefully will have time for them after the comments. So I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves and your area of expertise, starting with Alice.
Great, I didn't know sitting on the right meant going first. Hi, thanks Dominique so much for your fascinating talk. You covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Alice Fleerackers. I'm a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC, where we actually don't have frozen lakes, very fortunately. And I work a lot in a scholarly communications lab, which is a very interdisciplinary, international research group that not only studies some science communication and how the public engages with and understands research, but also studies the scholarly ecosystem and how we as researchers actually bring our knowledge out and share it with each other. And so that's been a very enriching place to do my PhD, where I think I'm constantly thinking about the common ground between the research system and the sort of public communication, the work that the practitioners are doing to bring that research out into a different audience.
Yael?
Hi everyone, my name is Yael Bar-Elben David. I did my PhD at the Technion under the supervision of Professor Yael Abraham Tzabari, and my research was focused about science communication training programs and how efficient are they. And part of it, I developed a workshop in Israel for training scientists in science communication, giving them the skills and strategies to communicate their science. But currently, I'm directing the Citizen Lab, which is a joint endeavor between the Faculty of Education in Science and Technology at the Technion and Maditech, which is the National Science Museum for Technology, Air, and Space. And what we're trying to do as part of the Citizen Lab is to engage the public through public engagement activities and citizen science projects in order to connect people, like strengthening the connections of the local community with science. And part of it is understanding that we are not the only one that have the answers, and the knowledge that we possess is not more or stronger in decision making. And we need to give the local community and their needs and their agenda the same place as we are giving the information that we are holding.
Hepeng.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Hepeng Jia. Right now I'm a professor at Soochow University. So today's topic is seeking common ground. But what's interesting is in the past 3 years since Ruby and I set up the research team at Soochow University in science communication, we are continually exploring China difference. So for example, we have found that Chinese scientists' attitude on science communication cannot predict their intention to participate in communication. We also found, for example, the more Chinese scientists perceived institutional censorship, we commonly think that this will make them keep silent. But our finding is the more they perceive the censorship, the more likely they want to talk to the media. So a lot of this difference. But I think one common thing is we are using the way of science and science communication. That is very highly empirical and also trying to seek some common logics behind the difference in the surface. I think this is just the beginning, and I believe we at Soochow University and other Chinese scholars, we can continue to work more, and eventually we can use our study to have more dialogue and also perhaps to move out of the comfortable space and to set up more ground for the common ground. Thank you.
Thank you. So now is the time that I ask each of you to reflect and share your thoughts about what Dominique presented in the light of your expertise. So Alice again, please.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, there were so many things that resonated with me from that talk, especially the value of really speaking and listening with practitioners. I've been so honored during my PhD to be able to do practice. I was encouraged to do some journalism in my first year as I was doing my courses and to actually practice what I was studying. I have done amazing workshops with practitioners who are just starting to try to understand even what is science communication, and to hear the things that they're stumbling on, which often are the most sort of basic findings of our field that still are not common knowledge. I've also been extremely lucky to do a lot of interviews with journalists about my work, but also about other things happening in the pandemic, because a lot of my work has been studied on health communication and the communication of that uncertain and fast-moving science. And in each of those interviews, I've started to ask at the very end to the journalist, if you were a researcher, what would be the one question you would really want to answer? And those questions, those conversations, even though I haven't had the money, the time, the funding to necessarily answer all of those questions, have just so enriched my work and changed my perspective on what is the valuable science to be doing, what is actually going to create a difference for the people who I'm really trying to help in my work. The one place I will push back on what you said, Dominique, is that sort of there's all these researchers who are trying to do science communication research right, and sort of I think implied in that was sort of failing or reproducing the wheel, reinventing the wheel. And I do think that that happens. We see many, many papers that come out about how much knowledge is being diffused. But at the same time, and I think this conference is a great example, listening and reading outside of your field can bring such a different perspective. And even if it's understanding the way that our field is misunderstood, that has value. And so I have really enjoyed in my PhD, even though it adds a lot of reading to the list, doing that reading and seeing how very different communities are thinking about public knowledge and are thinking about what it means to share what we know with people who could benefit from it. So yeah, with that sort of semi-provocative note, I'll pass it on over to Yael.
Well, I actually thank you for that because I wanted to say something about the same topic. Actually, I want to share with you a short story, like a personal story that I encountered around that topic of other people trying to do science communication. During the last few years, I got to know quite a lot of doctors. And in one point, I participated in a research about, let me see if I'll manage to say that. It's pregnancy-related diabetes, okay? And one of the doctors, he wanted to do a research about seeing how, if you're giving a mom to be with pregnancy-related diabetes, information about the importance of breastfeeding afterwards, because apparently there is a strong connection between, it's like pregnancy is some sort of like a strain test for your body, and if you are developing pregnancy-related diabetes during pregnancy, you're more likely to have type 2 diabetes later on in life. But breastfeeding, and I hope that I'm telling you, it's like, and apparently that breastfeeding reduced that statistics by a few margins. It's like really important for women to know that. And they tried to do an intervention test, a clinical intervention test, which was giving women with pregnancy related diabetes to read information or to watch a short movie that portrays a lot of information and a lot of specialists talking in front of a slideshow, and at the end a little bit of tips from a nursing consultant. And they wanted to know if that affected later if more women decided to breastfeed. They didn't saw any effect on that. But the thing is, when I got the movie to watch it, I was telling him, but that time he was a friend of mine, and I was like, you know, I can help you do this better. And he's like, what? I know that you're doing research at the Technion. What it is that you're doing? I was like, science communication. He's like, oh, okay, what's that? And that got us talking. And the thing is, I realized that although we're doing a lot of science communication practice and research, and we're doing a lot of evidence-based practice, not a lot of people outside of our practice know exactly what it is that we're doing. And it's something that when someone else is trying to do science communication, and they don't know that they can come to us and get this evidence-based practice and research and theory and everything that can inform their endeavors, it's something that we need to think about.
Thank you, Hepeng.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I want to continue the theme of the China difference, but the purpose is not to tell how many differences we have, but my purpose is that, well, we understand the difference, but we need to find some common ground solution. So for example, a lot of our study have found Chinese scientists quite different communication behavior. Based on this behavior, I think it is quite difficult for us in China to introduce the dialogue-based science communication. There's nothing called debate in China. So don't think about this. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean science communication is dead in China. Actually, in the past 10 years, it's growing very quickly. Many internet, we would call famous scientists are becoming famous also internet science communicator. So the key, I think, is to, while you understand difference, you try to find some situation-triggered solution. So for example, the difference I introduced just now, the attitude cannot predict the intention. That is much because in China, the science communication is highly organized. So for individual scientists, even they think science communication is very important, but they just wait for the assignment of their employer. So based on this, we try to persuade more policymakers to set more stronger professional science communication team at Chinese university or institute. This is just the beginning, but I think this might be a way that we can trying to find the differences while trying to provide or at least explore possible solution. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. So now my question for you guys is what we can do more, better, to make stronger the relation between research and practice in science communication. Do you want to start again, Alice?
It's nice because I get all the low-hanging fruit. So I think, I loved that you sort of mentioned how people outside of our field have no idea what we're doing and don't know to come to us. And I think it's rather ironic that the people who study science communication are so terribly bad at communicating the science that we do. And I think a great example of this is actually a study by your former supervisor, which maybe you were involved in? No. We're looking at the amount of jargon in one of our most popular, leading journals, The Public Understanding of Science, which found that level of jargon is actually increasing over time, which is obviously not particularly good for the public understanding of science. And related to that, understanding also means that people need to have access. And so many of our journals and our journal articles are still not free to read, which frankly, to me, is unacceptable. And so I think as researchers, and I'm speaking as a researcher more than a practitioner here, we needed to think beyond sort of the usual suspects who are going to read our work and consider that there may be others. I mean, I've had a conversation at the swimming pool the other day with my friend who doesn't even have an undergraduate degree, who's trying to get pregnant at an older age. And she says she's been reading every meta-analysis she can find on PubMed, and she has become an expert. But of course, she's also relying on things like Sci-Hub, which are a legal, pirate bay of academic research. So I think considering not just how we communicate our research in terms of the language we use or the sort of promotion we do or engagement we might do with communities, the workshops, the conferences like this, I think we also need to think about that bare minimum that our field still has yet to sort of achieve, which is making our knowledge freely available to people who may be seeking it out. This is something that I've seen in interviews with journalists as part of my PhD. Many of them have told us over and over again in those interviews that accessing research knowledge, like finding a way to read it, is one of the main challenges of their work. And so, yeah, I want to leave you to think about that. If people cannot read it, especially a journalist whose job is to bring knowledge into public conversations about things that matter in society, if even those people are unable to read what we research, what we spend our whole lives studying, I'm not sure that we can even move forward as a field to bridge communities and create common ground.
Wow. Thank you. I'm trying to think to which part I want to add on. But you know what? I'll tell you something something I found about jargon. During my PhD research, I interviewed quite a lot of scientists, and one of the things that really surprised me was that the female scientists were telling me things like, in interviews, were like telling me, listen, you're doing this science communication workshops and you're telling us all the time, tell your story, use emotions, reduce your jargon. I can't do that. Nobody will take me seriously. I don't know, I'm just putting it out there. Maybe we feel the same as a field, that we need to use the jargon in order to be counted as like a legitimate research field. I don't know, I'm just putting it out there. And regarding the practice and research, I was just talking to Bruce a few moments ago, and sharing my impression that there is a lot of people that I got to know here in the conference that are doing both things. They have like one leg doing research, second hand or leg doing the practice. So I think we realize that there is a huge connection, like it's a must-be connection. We have to have our practice to be informed and based on theory and evidence, and I think it's something that we realize and we're moving towards it very strongly. But when we're talking to communities, like different communities, there's like another anecdote, sorry, it's like stories. When one of the projects that we planned to do in the Citizen Lab was to do, like, plan a hackathon. And we're like, oh, that'll be such an amazing thing. We will come to the local community, ask them what are their needs, what they need to improve in their neighborhood, what they want us to do, and we'll bring the students from the Technion, which are doing they're studying civil engineering and mechanical engineering and all those practical things, and we will find a technical solution to their needs. Let's do that. And I got so excited about that, and I started talking to people and trying to raise money for that funds for the hackathon. And then I met one of the social workers in the neighborhood that we were planning to do that hackathon, and she told me, listen, the people in the neighborhood went through so many times this discussions and talking about their needs and what you need to improve and what it is that you want to change in your neighborhood, that they are tired of doing that because nothing changes. And she was the first one to tell me that. And I was like a little bit, okay, but it's still really a great idea. And then a second person tells me that. And then I talked to someone from the neighborhood and it was like, listen, we are not going to sit in another round table telling exactly what we want to say. And after 3 months, nothing will happen. And after a year, nothing will happen. We need something that will actually be there in the ground. So we decided to drop this project. Instead of that, what we did is, during this talk that we had, this round table, with local people from the community that we wanted to talk, we asked them, so what will help? What do you want? Tell us. Is it something that we can do? We can provide something? We can support something to do? They're like, well, we have a really big problem with open grounds, like a garden. We don't have any place to go afternoon. Grandma can't go with her grandchildren outside of the house because the neighborhood is very crowded. We need somewhere that will be safe and maybe educational in the process. So now we're actually doing a cactus garden, and we're adding like all kinds of scientific content into it. Games that we're drawing, we're choosing with the community what games are we going to draw on the floor, what are the things that they want to play with, what are the things that will, if we put there, people will just take, destroy, or won't use. But it's just it's like taking the practice and the theory that we know, offering things, and getting the no as an answer. It's like agreeing to listen that what we thought would be a great idea, isn't that a great idea?
Oh, I want to follow up by starting to Brossard's just point. We need to move out of the comfort zone. I mean, everyone knows that we need to have a best practice based on best research, but how to do it actually is shaped by a lot of circumstances. For example, as a science communication scholar, the things that you can get most incentive is to publish in top journals. When you do a lot of science communication practice, you may not get so much reward in academic world. So this need you to move out of the comfort zone. For me, in the past several months, I think I have encountered the type of the setback. So I live in Soochow city. Soochow is in the richest Chinese part, and there's many local Chinese government. They have, I think, really a lot of resources. Previously, they never thought of doing science communication, but recently, I think this is a result of the societal progress. Some of the local government, they don't have scientists, they don't have a university, but they want to do science communication. So one of the local government invited me to support them to do science communication. But initially, we found we have very deep conflict. They want to use science communication project to attract visitors, to make more people, and also to make some money, not make money for the government, but make money for the local resident. But initially, I want to use that chance to experiment my ideas. China needs citizen science, Chinese scientists need to get trained, and Chinese, there's need of dialogue, they need debate-based science communication. We have a lot of conflict. But later on, I gradually think that I need to move out of the comfort zone. That is, for me, that is what I'm familiar with. But if you really think that you can make things forward, you need to adapt to a lot of local situation. And right now, we are still maybe in terms of some dispute, but I think the things is going on, and maybe next year when some of you go to Soochow for PCST symposium, you will see some of our results. Thank you.
What about you, Dominique?
Yes, actually, I'm glad that we agree about this point, that, I don't think our knowledge is readily accessible, and this is a problem not only in the academic world, where we have some, scholars in some countries don't have access to the journals. It's expensive. I mean, it's really a problem. But also when I was talking about, obviously, JCOM is open access. Thank you, JCOM. But also the idea to reemphasize what you were saying, that we need to be out there. We cannot wait for people to come find out what they need to know to do things the way we think all would be the best. We need to make an effort to actually be out there. And I mean, I think Luisa here, Marina here, Jenny, right in the conversation, Saidev and so on, where you are there actually, communicating the science of science communication for others. It's something that we need to think seriously as part of our, role. Which means, by the way, not everybody should do that, because not everybody can write clearly about our, research, and hence potentially find a good collaborator, a good practitioner that can do it for us. I mean, I know that the conversation, it's a good platform because you write with journalists and editors that actually are making sure that what you write is okay. So you just pitch an idea and you work with them if they think it's a good idea. So I think there's a way to move forward if you're not good yourself to do that outreach about science of science communication, that others know how to do it, and that's a way to collaborate. But we have great example in the room of people that have that double hat, the research practice, and are making an effort to actually reach across the aisle. And I think we should take that as an example and strive to do as well as they do.
Thank you so much. So now is the time for you guys. So if you want to, Marina is already going to the microphone, which is really cool. And so, yeah, people are going to, so excellent.
I'm just going to grab this because it's quite low. Hello, my name is Marta Rozenbrand. I'm currently a master's student, science communication at Leiden University. And I'm also interning at NWO, which for those of you that don't know, is the Dutch Research Council and the funding body. And I really connect to your points of that we have to engage stakeholders and communities early on in our research project. And that's something that we also really are trying to encourage. And I mainly focus now on the communication around a research program connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so this is very global research, and we're really also trying to stimulate this. But a problem that I've really run into is that, yes, we're trying to really encourage scientists to engage communities, to engage all stakeholders, change makers, to generate their impact. But we've gotten a lot of feedback from researchers. I don't have time for this. I don't have resources for this. I don't know where to start. And that how we as the Global North sort of have structured our whole research system doesn't connect to global impact and North-South relations. So how do you view maybe institutional change and how we've structured our research agenda here?
Can I suggest that we have 3 questions and then we have a round of answers? Is that okay? Yeah? There is. So should we go ahead or? Okay, Marina.
Okay, just, I was burning to ask a question, and I think, Dominique, to some extent you answered it already, but just maybe to ask again, in your view, how relevant is science communication research to people in broad society? So I'm not talking about climate change research or COVID research or whatever. I'm talking about the kind of research that we publish in JCOM and POS and science communication. How relevant is that knowledge to the broad society? We know it's relevant to practitioners, and we are working on that linking. But how relevant is it to broad society, and what can we do better as science communication researchers to actually make it more accessible to, I know there's no such thing as the general public, but you know what I mean in this case.
Jenny?
Yes. You talked about, Dominique, you talked about the danger of following science too closely. And yet the discussion has focused on mostly scientific knowledge. How do scholars and practitioners take on that boundary-spanning role of actually bringing in other forms of knowledge along with the traditional notion of what we have as science into the conversation?
So,
Can you repeat? I was taking notes about the other one. I thought I had great memory, but I'm getting very old.
I was saying that the conversation mostly talked about scientific knowledge and how that is used and the role of scholars and practitioners in that space. My question is about other forms of knowledge and how scholars and practitioners have a role to bring that together to look at some of the issues that society has and different sectors of society have.
So let's go for some answers here, comments, and then we go back to Felicity.
Great. So to the first point, I think that was an excellent point about the challenge of stakeholder engagement when you address global issues. And I'm going to be honest, it doesn't work. I was actually in a panel with people from WHO talking about that, and the communication director of the WHO saying how
it was really hard to do that at a global scale. So this kind of participatory, involvement, engagement really works at the local community level. And the examples you gave with your stories are, really good. So finding the right partner at the right level, you will find a scientist that wants to work with you. As soon as you move toward more the global scale, it's harder and harder to find people that can be, meaningfully engaged. So that's the challenge, I think, to find the right context. It goes back to your point, actually, so how can we, on the one hand, being very locally relevant, taking into account the context, but being relevant at the global level? Well, let's make stories that connect everything, That's what we try to do at AAAS with our story of hope. So each community had a different partnership between scientists, practitioners, but all together, they're all story of hope is what community are doing. And, I'm finding that thread that science communication research can build around those stories. It's feasible for people like you, Marina, you're a gifted writer. But so it's for those that know how to do that, I think we need to make the effort to find that thread. It's like it is important to draw the global implications of whatever we do, to remind the relevance, and we need to make sure that we constantly do that. I mean, it's kind of a canned answer that I give you, but I think, it's like when you do a dissertation defense, my students know that at the end I always tell them, and so what? At the defense, so what? What for society and so on? What does it mean? Can we actually draw on this and find some relevance? Your point, Jenny, about scientific knowledge is such a good one, and I feel like we still have failed to make clear that there's so many types of knowledge. I mean, lay knowledge, as you said, at the community level, different disciplines and so on. And we keep on, my point about monolithic answers, what does even scientific knowledge mean? What knowledge are we talking about? What science are we talking about, and so on? And that's where ScienceCom actually can help, I think, to diffuse this kind of monolithic answer that at the end of the day, in order to answer a simple answer, we end up actually giving a simplistic answer. And I think that's very, very dangerous.
Okay, yeah, I also follow for the global challenge issue. 20 years ago, I entered this field by working for SciDemNet. So Louisa is my colleague. At the very beginning, as the work of SciDemNet and the later World Federation of Science Journalists, do a lot of work to support science communication capacity in developing countries. So I think capacity building is one very important thing, either to address global issue or address the problem challenge of the quite low income or later developed country. And another thing, based on my personal experience, I think when doing things, particularly when doing things starting from the developed world, from rich world, people really need to highly respect the local practice. I remember, I don't know whether many of you know a project called Scoop. Scoop was launched by World Federation of Science Journalists to make science journalists based in developed world to help science journalists in developing country. And it was really a big success. One of its success is it has helped develop a strong team of African science journalists. And at that time, there was one proposal. I remember clearly that proposal was given to the Dutch Development Agency. That is to make African science journalists to become tutors for other developing countries' science journalists. I think, although I think that proposal was rejected, but I think this idea is very good. Is if you want to solve global issues, it will solve many of the local communities things. You really need to work with them and to respect the local experience and local wisdom.
Yeah, Alice, do you want to add something? It's not mandatory. It's not an obligation.
I just want to repeat a sentence that I heard in one of the sessions that really echoes with me. that we need to remember that we have the power to decide who is talking, when, and in what order. And that is a very strong power that we need to be very aware of and use it moderately and like very.
I'll add one thing, because I think Marina's question wasn't really addressed about how relevant is the science of science communication to people who are not practitioners. This is why my obsessive note-taking is helpful. And yeah, I think kind of related to what I said about access and journals, my supervisor, Juan Pablo Alperin, actually for his dissertation did a study where he looked at who is accessing research articles and why. So there was a survey that would pop up every time somebody downloaded an article, a short 2 questions. And when looking at some of the articles that were analyzed or that were read by citizens who said they were reading it for personal reasons, they were the most obscure articles, like about optical physics. I don't even know what that is. You know, looking at molecular structures. We don't know what people want to know and what they find valuable. And specific to the science of science communication, there's this one article that came out during the pandemic in The Atlantic by a science communication professional, Liz Neely, where she starts with this extremely powerful line: "We are all science communicators now. COVID-19 has conscripted us." And I think that it's true. We are in this moment. We're still in a pandemic. But also the pandemic highlighted the value of knowing how to communicate about information in society. And I think some of that sort of awareness of the value of what we do has also now expanded to a public awareness of the value of communicating climate science in an effective way, or having good conversations about vaccines more broadly than just the pandemic context. And so, yeah, I think that this question of who even is a science communicator or might be a science communicator is very relevant to the question of who might find this research useful. And the reality is we just don't know how many people may, if they found that research and were able to understand it.
Yeah. Sorry, Marina, I forgot that question, but just a personal anecdote. I'm part of something that's called the Public Speaker Bureau, which, you know, a bunch of professors. There's a database where communities, you know, like retirement home, churches, public libraries, you name it. Last time was the Intermediate Women Club of like a little town, that can ask us to come talk about things. And I was asked to talk about climate change, but I don't talk about climate change. I talk to people about why people form some attitudes about climate change. And I tell them I take as a premise that climate change is related to human activities. We're not going to discuss that. But it's like, let's reflect on why we feel a certain way about it. They're fascinated. People want to know, people want to understand, and why headlines impact people's belief and so on. And I mean, I would say like lay audiences are fascinated by the things we know, but again, I'm fortunate we have that bureau at my university, but I think those that do not have them, I bet if you offer to talk to the libraries and so on, they'll be interested in finding out. I've been fascinated to find out how much people are fascinated by what we do. As you say, Alice, right? When it's actually incredible. We should do a study.
Felicity, please.
I'm Felicity Meller, Imperial College London. I think I walked up to the stand with a bucket of cold water, which might have warmed a little bit since I've been standing here. But I'm concerned that we're here in a session, you've all been using the first person plural quite a lot to talk about our field. And yet in a session that's framed as the science of science communication, and that concerns me. So you're talking about our field as needing to, I think perhaps I'm slightly overstating this, but being driven by empirical work, influenced by psychological studies, solution-oriented. And of course there's a space for all of that. And you're talking about a common ground between research and practice, and that's really important as well. But perhaps to push that metaphor of the commons a little bit too far, but in establishing the commons, you also move some people on. And I think we need to think about who's being moved on by framing our field as a science. And so I want to make the case for humanities and for contextual studies, for studies that can't be reduced to empiricism, for studies that are about critique and about digging deeper and adding layers of meanings and complicating things. The problem with science as a method is it's a reductionist one at heart. It's about simplifying things so that the situation is simple enough to then carry out an empirical study. And so I want to make the case for complication, for humanities, to speak up for the historians in the audience here, the cultural studies people, and also for jargon. We've had sessions where we've been talking about whether the audience or the goal should be at the heart of communication, and I think the conclusion is that both. A journal like Public Understanding of Science, its audience is people in this field, however we frame that, and its goal is to move our field on internally. In that internal communication, we need to be able to speak in a language that's precise and nuanced and rich. And so we've got to have, it's a derogative term, but we've got to have jargon, and we've been using such words over the last few days here. I hope Public Understanding of Science continues to be a space where we can talk to each other, and talking to other audiences, whether it's scientists or practitioners or the general public, that's a different thing, and we do that somewhere else. And I think if we're mindful of these things, perhaps Jenny's point, is better addressed. Because I was in a session yesterday where we spoke about how science communication has been captured by neoliberal capitalism. I think we're in danger of letting science communication studies be captured by a scientistic paradigm.
So I don't know if this is a reaction to my talk, but I refer to my advisor, who's a historian of science and sociology of science person. So I didn't mean to imply at all that it was just based on psychological studies, and people that know the type of work we do, that it's informed by qualitative research, textual analysis, you name it. Humanities, and now we do project with science and art and anything. But so I think you're right. I think we shouldn't, and you know what? I hate, another word that I hate, to go back to your point of reductionist, is interventions. Science communication research is gonna determine interventions. I'm like, ooh, that's scary, right? That seems so medical, that's not what understanding is about. It's and so I totally agree with your point that we need to be careful and not fall into a pure empiricist approach that misses the nuance and what other disciplines can bring as well, such as, obviously, I think that's what's hard with communication. It's funny. I come from a genetics background a long time ago, but the first communication class that I took, the first paper, what is communication? And I was like, okay, that was, and then we spent, with Jim Shanahan, we spent, 3 months trying to define communication, and that the problem is that we draw on sociology, psychology, social psychology, you name it, philosophy, and so on, and that's the trick. How do we actually have a field that is a field while drawing on so many paradigms, I think, is the challenge, but also the opportunity to go beyond simplistic approaches.
Yeah, we do. We're till 10, right? Yeah. Thank you for doing the classic humanities thing of critiquing, contextualizing, and pushing the boundary. I think to the point about jargon, you're right. Jargon has a lot of value. But I guess that comment was made in the context of public use of research and of practitioner use of research. And so that is a challenge. And perhaps it would be less of a challenge if we had more communication of what we do in a publicly accessible way. Something to think about, something to complicate. I'm actually not a scientist of science communication, but I use the word science very inclusively, because when I think about our community, I do think about scholarship. I think about all of the practitioners here. I think about the indigenous experts who have been so gracious during this conference to share their experiences, to share their knowledges. And I think that is challenging. I think that is challenging because there's a tension between valuing specificity, as Dominique said, and valuing inclusion. And to the point you made earlier about perhaps we are using jargon because we feel we need to legitimize ourselves as a field, that there is a challenge of making sure that we have an identity while still being open to taking in that rich body of knowledge, or the bodies of knowledges that can so shape and inform and challenge and critique the work that we do.
We have a last question here, and then we are going to wrap up with a last comment from you guys, and then we are going to move to our other sessions, please. So please go ahead.
Cool, Leon Huber from Studio Synergy. Alice, in the concept of open access of our research, I was actually struck by the banner on the stage, since two of the sponsors, GSK and Pfizer, actually spend a lot of money into research. So doesn't open access require a new way of conducting science? Isn't there a conflict of interests where industry wants to conduct research to maximize profit? How do you reflect on this mangle of interests?
Yeah, I think that is kind of scary, potentially. But I think there are other models of open access that are really valuable and don't come with that potential tension between what a pharmaceutical company, with all respect to our funders, want and sort of the independence of research. For example, JCOM is a really good example. The Journal of Science Communication is free to publish and free to read, and I don't believe it is funded by Big Pharma. That would be quite unexpected. Might make me like Big Pharma a little better. And there's also open journal systems, which has been huge in Latin America and much of the world, which is another sort of a free, open source, like very, very accessible way to publish an open access journal. So these things are starting, and if we look to other parts of the world where they're actually already normalized, and there's an entire scholarly system that is making open access a more equitable way to publish that is less reliant on funding from bodies that may not have the same interests at heart. And I think it's worth looking to some of those existing examples rather than reinventing the wheel, as Dominique has suggested.
So we need to start going to the end. So if you want to say anything else, please go ahead.
So I want to respond to the money question as well as the earlier ones about how make the science communication research heard. I think the important thing is we do not need to prioritize our own field. Our field is part of the effort for the public good. So no matter whether the money thing or no matter whether the popularity thing, the key is we can provide some type of the solution or some type of the idea that help our society to become better. So we can work together with many other fields, and we can maybe use the pharmaceutical money. That is not for the money itself, but we, as a science communicator, we try to improve the whole world.
Yael, do you want to say any final comment? Again, it's not mandatory.
I just wanted to ask you something about what the story you said about when you asked to talk about climate change. But you didn't talk about your research, right? You had to find something that would interest the people and about science communication.
Right, right. And I mean, these kind of talks is more, it's not a plenary talk anyway, it's boring to come and just lecture people. And it's mainly, you know, seeing what they want to talk about and be reactive on the spot and having a conversation. And it's actually, I mean, I enjoy it, but it's really like, you know, on the spot, like people, you know, having a conversation and getting to know people and what they're interested about and trying to, like, you know, like you would do in a class, right? If you were like, ideally, you want to fit, you know, the conversations to the students. So, yes, like, you know, like you bring a lot of type of research to the conversation, not only mine.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you want to say?
Well, I just wanted to thank you, everyone. I mean, this is an amazing PCST, and I want to take advantage here to thank the organizers for bringing us all together here in this amazing community, and I think this made me hopeful as far as finding common grounds.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. But it seems that I have gifts to give to them, right?